Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling something that I think we've all felt at some point, and that's feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
You know that feeling, right? Like
Yeah.
you just have too much going on and it all feels like a giant, heavy cloud kind of hanging over your head.
Oh, yeah. I know that feeling all too well.
Well, on today's deep dive, we're going to try to break through that fog and find some clarity. And we're going to be using the guide that you sent over to help us do just that.
Great.
So the guide is called Finding Clarity Amidst Overwhelm. And one of the things that I thought was super interesting is that it uses a case study.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and it actually shows how they helped one professional kind of break free from this feeling of being overwhelmed.
I love that. I think case studies are so helpful because it's one thing to sort of talk about these concepts in theory, but it's another thing to really see how they play out.
Totally. And how they play out in someone's actual life, right?
Exactly.
And the guide dives right into this idea that escaping a stressful situation doesn't equal instant clarity. You know what I mean?
Like even when the initial chaos is over, you're still kind of reeling from it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. It's kind of like that feeling after you finally get out of a crazy traffic jam.
Right.
Like the relief is there, but you're still all tense.
Oh, yeah.
You're free from the traffic, but it's like the effects of that whole chaotic experience kind of linger.
Totally.
The guide actually calls this the burnout cycle.
I see. So it's not just about that initial stressful situation. It's about the after effects too. The fatigue, the confusion, all of that.
Yeah. And the guide has this great analogy. It says it's like walking out of a dense fog, but straight into a thick forest.
Okay. I like
So
that.
you're not in the fog anymore, but now you're lost in the woods.
Right. And I think that's so relatable for a lot of people because we're so used to just pushing through those tough times, but then we don't know what to do when we actually come out on the other side.
It's like we're good at dealing with the crisis, but not so much with the aftermath.
Yeah. And what's interesting is the guide highlights this thing that I think we're all kind of guilty of, which is that we can give really great advice to our friends who are going through this.
Oh, totally.
But when it comes to applying that same wisdom to ourselves, not so easy.
It's like we have this inner critic that loves to dismiss our own good advice.
Yeah. It's like, oh, that's great advice for someone else, but it doesn't apply to me.
Exactly.
So the question is, how do we actually move past that inner critic and get to some actual clarity?
That's the million-dollar question.
Well, the guide emphasizes this idea of really visualizing what clarity actually looks like for you.
I like that.
Like not just less stress, but what does a clear and fulfilling life actually feel like?
It's getting specific, right?
Exactly. It's about painting a picture of what you actually want your life to look like.
Yeah. Okay, and speaking of getting specific, the guy has some really interesting practical strategies. The one that really jumped out at me was about boundaries.
Oh, boundaries. Yes. Such an important topic.
I know, right? And the guide frames it in a whole new light.
Yeah.
It's not about shutting people out. It's about creating space for yourself to thrive.
I was reading a study recently, actually.
Oh, yeah.
It was in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, and it found that people who are really good at setting clear boundaries, they actually report higher levels of well-being
Interesting.
and lower levels of stress, which totally makes sense.
Totally. It's like when you have those boundaries in place, you're not constantly feeling pulled in a million different directions.
Right. You're protecting your time and energy for the things that actually matter to you.
And the guide even uses this anecdote about the case study subject. So he was a busy professional, always on the go, and he learned to limit his work hours so that he could actually be more present with his family.
Oh, you love that.
And guess what? It actually ended up boosting his productivity at work.
That's so interesting because it challenges this assumption that we have to be on all the time to be successful.
Right.
Sometimes saying no is actually the most productive thing you can do.
It's like saying yes to yourself, to your own well-being.
I love that reframing.
And speaking of saying yes to the positive, the guide also highlights the importance of celebrating those wins, even the tiny ones.
Oh, yeah, that's huge. There's so much research on the power of positive reinforcement.
Really?
Yeah. There was a study in the Journal of Happiness Studies, and it found that people who regularly celebrate their achievements, no matter how small, they experience higher levels of happiness and motivation.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so it's not about waiting for those big milestones. It's about acknowledging those small wins along the way.
So even if it's just finishing a small task or making a healthy choice, acknowledge it. celebrate it. So
Exactly.
it's not just about avoiding the negative, it's about actively cultivating the positive.
Totally. It's about shifting your focus to the good stuff.
Okay, now this next point was interesting to me. The guy talks about shifting our relationship with tasks.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So instead of seeing them as
Yeah.
like these boxes to check off this never-ending list,
It encourages you to view them as what?
as opportunities for growth and connection,
Oh, I like that.
which from like a psychological perspective is really fascinating when we can actually like focus on the potential for growth within each task.
It kind of takes the pressure off that outcome, right?
Right. It becomes less about just getting it done
Yeah.
and more about like the process itself.
Yeah, it's a really subtle but powerful shift in perspective.
Makes you wonder what would happen if we all saw our to-do lists that way.
Totally.
Like instead of this mountain of things to do, it's a collection of opportunities.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's like reframing those tasks as like little adventures
Yeah.
instead of just chores.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about like all the things that we do every day. It changes how you experience those tasks.
Yeah.
And the guide, it also goes into, the whole idea of our relationships and how they play into like this feeling of overwhelm. And it's not just about, them being potential stressors,
Right.
but they can also be like sources of strength, right?
Yeah.
When we're feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, for sure.
And it really encourages us to think about what quality time looks like for us. What do you think?
It's so easy when you are stressed to just let those really meaningful connections kind of slide. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the guide makes a really good point. Those relationships can be like a lifeline, not just another thing on our to-do list.
Totally.
For me, I think like quality time is really about being present, putting away the phone, really listening. It's about connection, not just being in the same room,
Yeah.
you know?
And there's a lot of research that backs that up, actually.
Really?
Yeah, studies have shown that strong social connections they actually lower your stress hormone levels.
Wow.
And they can boost your immune system, too.
That's amazing.
So it's not just a nice to have. Nurturing those relationships is like crucial for your well-being.
It's like a buffer against the overwhelm.
Exactly.
Speaking of things that we can, at least try to control.
Yeah.
The guide also talks about addressing the root causes of our stress, like not just powering through it.
Right.
I was reading about the case study, and he was mentioning how he felt like he was operating at 500% capacity,
Oh, wow.
which the guide points out is totally unsustainable.
Right. And it's interesting because the guide connects this like unsustainable pace to our physical health.
Okay.
And the case study subject I think he was struggling with, like chronic fatigue and some gut issues, which were obviously adding to his feeling of overwhelm.
That mind-body connection, right?
Exactly.
We tend to think of them as separate, but they're so intertwined.
Yeah. There's a growing body of research that supports this.
Really?
Yeah. Studies have shown that like chronic stress can lead to inflammation in the gut.
Oh, wow.
And that can then impact like your mood, your energy levels, and even your cognitive function.
So addressing those physical health issues could actually be a key part of managing overwhelm.
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes you wonder how many of us are kind of pushing through those physical warning signs, thinking it's just stress.
Right.
When it could be something more.
Yeah, for sure. The guide even suggests, working with a health performance expert to address those like underlying issues.
Interesting.
Taking a holistic approach, recognizing that your physical health and your mental health are like two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I mean, sometimes it's not always that easy to prioritize, right?
Yeah, I get that.
It can feel like just one more thing to add to the to-do list.
That's true. But the guide reframes it in a really interesting way. It talks about making like small sustainable changes. Things like, incorporating mindful movement into your day. Maybe tweaking your diet a little bit, like including more whole foods, or even just making sure you're getting enough sleep.
Yeah, those are things that, at least in theory, we can all do.
Right. It's not about these drastic overhauls,
Yeah.
It's about those small, consistent choices that add up over time.
And those small changes can really make a big difference, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like there was a study published in The Lancet, and they found that even moderate exercise can significantly reduce like symptoms of anxiety and depression.
Really?
So it's not about becoming like a marathon runner. It's about finding ways to move your body that feel good and that fit into your life.
It's about making those choices that support our well-being, not add to our stress.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, shifting gears a bit, the guide also talks about the importance of setting clear, achievable goals when you're feeling overwhelmed.
Oh, yes. Goals. Love it.
Right.
It's not about adding more to your plate, though.
Right.
It's about getting really clear on what matters to you.
Yeah.
And creating like a roadmap to get there. The case study subject, I think he mentioned how he just felt like lost in this sea of expectations.
Oh, yeah.
Both personal and professional.
Yeah.
It was through like defining specific goals that were aligned with his values that he started to like regain a sense of purpose and direction.
So it's about aligning your actions with your values, not just reacting to whatever's thrown at you.
Exactly.
I like that. So, I mean, there's actually research on this, right? On the power of goal setting.
Tons of research.
Yeah.
Yeah, like there was a study in the Journal of Applied Psychology, and they found that people who set specific challenging goals, they're more likely to achieve them than those who set like vague or easy goals.
Okay.
So it's not just about like wishing for things to be better. It's about creating a plan to make it happen.
So how do we go about setting those goals in a way that like actually helps with overwhelm and doesn't just add to it?
Well, the guide suggests breaking down like those big goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
Yeah.
You know, creating a roadmap for progress that feels less daunting
Yeah.
and more attainable.
It's like climbing a mountain.
Exactly.
You don't focus on the summit the entire time. You focus on that next step.
The next handhold.
She makes it feel so much less overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about celebrating those small wins along the way, too.
Oh, yeah.
Which helps build momentum. There's a lot of research on the power of, like, positive reinforcement. Basically, by acknowledging your progress, you're more likely to keep going.
So small steps, clear goals,
Yeah.
and celebrating the wins. It's starting to feel like a path out of that overwhelming forest. Okay. Now, this next part really resonated with me. The guide talks about creating a supportive environment, both physically and emotionally.
Yes, that's so important.
Right.
It's about taking control of the things that you can influence, even when life feels chaotic. I think the case study subject, he shared how he decluttered his physical space.
Okay.
And it helped clear his mind.
It's like that saying, outer order, inner calm, right?
Exactly. And there's actually some science behind that. Yeah, there's a growing body of research that suggests like a strong link between our physical environment and our mental state.
Okay.
Clutter can actually increase levels of cortisol, you know, the stress hormone,
Wow.
while a clean and organized space can promote feelings of calm and focus.
Wow. So it's not just about aesthetics, it's actually impacting our biology.
Exactly. And the guide also talks about creating like a supportive social network, you know, surrounding yourself with people who uplift and encourage you.
Oh, yeah, that's so important.
Right, because our social connections, they play such a vital role in our overall well-being.
Yeah, they really do.
Studies have shown that people with strong social support networks, they're more resilient to stress. They experience lower levels of anxiety and depression, and they even live longer, healthier lives.
Wow. It's amazing how powerful that is.
It really is.
So it's not just about who you spend time with, it's about who you let into your life, right?
Yeah.
It's about choosing those relationships that nourish you, not drain you.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that we actually have the power to choose who we spend our time with and to create like a social environment that supports our growth.
So it's about setting boundaries in our relationships too.
Absolutely.
Choosing those people who respect those boundaries and support our efforts to, create this less overwhelming life.
Right. It's about being really intentional with our relationships, making sure they align with our values and goals.
Okay. Now, this next part was really interesting to me. The guide talks about reconnecting with our passions and identities.
Oh, I love that.
Even amidst the chaos of overwhelm. The case study subject, I think he mentioned how he had lost touch with activities that once brought him joy.
Yes. And it's interesting because the guide connects this to the concept of like self-actualization,
Okay.
which is all about fulfilling your potential and living a life that's true to your authentic self.
Right. So it's about remembering who you are at your core,
Exactly.
beyond all those roles and responsibilities that can sometimes consume us.
Right.
It's like finding that spark again, that thing that makes you feel alive. And the guide really encourages us to embrace curiosity, to step outside our comfort zones and try new things.
Oh, I love that. It's about giving yourself permission to explore, to play, and to like rediscover those aspects of yourself that may have been, dormant for a while.
And I think they can be so hard when you're feeling overwhelmed.
Oh, I know. It's so easy to get caught up in that, like, I don't even have time to shower. How am I supposed to take up pottery mentality?
Right.
But the guide makes a really good point. It's not about adding more to your plate. It's about finding those things that energize you, that make you feel more like you.
It's like filling your cup so you have something to pour from.
Exactly. Instead of running on empty all the time.
Right.
And that brings us to another really important point from the guide, the whole idea of self-care.
Oh, yes, self-care. I feel like we hear about that all the time.
I know.
But it can feel so vague and overwhelming in itself sometimes.
Right. But the guide actually breaks it down in a really practical way. It's not just about bubble baths and spa days.
Although those are nice.
They are nice. But it's about taking care of like your physical, emotional, and mental well-being. So you can show up as your best self.
So what does that actually look like in practice? What are some examples of self-care that can actually help with overwhelm?
Well, the guide, it talks about, making self-care a non-negotiable part of your routine.
Okay.
It could be something as simple as just like carving out, 15 minutes in the morning for just a quiet cup of coffee before everyone else wakes up, or going for a walk in nature during your lunch break.
Okay.
It's about those like small moments of peace
Yeah.
and rejuvenation that can help you feel like grounded, even amidst, all the chaos.
Okay, so it's not about adding more to our to-do list. It's about finding those little pockets of time for ourselves
Exactly.
throughout the day. It's like hitting the pause button on overwhelm for a few minutes.
Yes. And there's actually research shows that even short breaks can significantly reduce stress levels.
Really?
Yeah. And improve your focus, too.
Interesting.
There was a study published in the Journal of Environmental Psychology, and they found that spending just 5 minutes in nature can have a positive impact on like your mood and your cognitive function.
Oh, wow. So it's not about escaping for like hours on end. It's about integrating those little moments of
Yeah.
self-care
Exactly.
into our everyday lives. I like that. And the guide even suggests like creating a self-care plan,
Oh, that's a good idea.
almost like a menu
Yeah.
of activities that you can choose from
Yeah.
depending on like how you're feeling.
And it emphasizes that self-care is not one size fits all.
Oh, for sure.
What works for one person might not work for another. So the key is to just like experiment and find those things that really nourish you
Yeah.
and that recharge you.
It's about being intentional about how we take care of ourselves,
Yeah.
not just waiting for burnout to hit before we do something about it. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to kind of circle back to the core message of finding clarity amidst overwhelm.
Okay.
It's a process, not a magic spell.
Yeah. It's about taking those like small, consistent steps, embracing the journey, and remembering that you're not alone.
And it's about celebrating those small victories along the way, like making time for a walk, saying no to something that, you don't want to do that drains you,
Yeah,
or simply like acknowledging when you're feeling good.
absolutely. Those little things make a big difference.
Yeah. Even the smallest acts of self-care, boundary setting, or, goal achieving, it can all have a ripple effect.
Totally. It creates positive momentum for lasting change.
So to everyone listening, what's one small win you can achieve this week to move towards, like a greater sense of clarity and control in your life? Even a 5-minute walk and a short meditation, a phone call with a friend, it all counts. Remember, even the smallest steps can make a difference. And as always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep learning, and keep striving for that sense of balance and harmony in your life. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.